Hello, everyone, and welcome to Encircle Publications' presentation of the Author Reading Showcase. I'm your host, Deirdre Waite. In this edition, Encircle Publications is featuring 4 authors to read to you from their latest and upcoming releases. Richard Cass, award-winning author of the Elder Darrow Mysteries. Phyllis Gobbell, author of Treachery in Tuscany, winner of the Silver Falchion Award. Erica Obi, author of The Horseman's Word, Book 1 in the Sons of the Wolf series. And C.B. Shanahan, debut author of the novel Hollis Whitaker, which is publishing this June. During the program, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please send us via the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We'll collect those questions and ask them at the end of the program. Thank you for joining us. Please sit back and relax and enjoy the show. First, we're going to go to Richard Cass in Maine. Hi, Richard. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Deirdre. Good evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks, Encircle, for doing this. And I'm happy that today we can celebrate Roy Orbison's birthday. I'm going to read to you a little section from chapter 1 of Sweetie Bogan's Sorrow, which is the 5th book in the Elder Darrow Jazz Mystery series, due out in September. The Elder Darrow series, as some of you know, is the story of an alcoholic who buys a dive bar in Boston, hoping it's going to help him get sober. He does dry himself out, more or less, but he also tends to get involved in murders. Lily's first solo date in a ratty club Rasmussen found off of Magazine Street near Dudley Square was a disaster. The bar was a slumped box of plywood painted black, the shelves behind it bowed under the weight of the bottles. The piano player was so drunk he kept fumbling the wrong keys into the chords, and the sound system buzzed like the devil humming. Halfway through Misty, she stopped, losing the thread. Rasmussen, at a table in front, smiled and patted his fingers together. She recovered and finished the song to a smatter of applause, none of it sober. Tears in her eyes, she stepped down off the stage. He half stood as she returned to the table. Lovely, he said. Little hiccup in the middle there, but just lovely. A light-skinned man, older than both of them, stepped up to the table, gave Rasmussen a curt nod, and spoke to her. Miss. His deep bass voice warmed her. Someone would like to meet you. We were getting ready to leave, Rasmussen said. It's all right, Raz. I should say hello to my fans, don't you think? The man conducted her to a niche in the far back corner, inside which sat a table for 2. A black curtain was pulled to one side and the light from a candle played across the seamed face of an old woman, her hair a tangle of steel wool. Lily started to sit down. No, no, the old woman said. Don't make yourself comfortable. I don't want to marry you. She cackled. The light-skinned man slipped away into the dimness. Lily's legs trembled. Then she remembered her manners. Yes, ma'am. The old woman turtled her neck, her lips working in and out. You have the magic, young lady. Lily started to shake her head, automatically modest. Don't you dare deny it. Thank you. Be true to it, child. Don't fake a thing and you'll go a long way, if that's what you want. The old woman's voice was suppler now, with hints of musicality. You know who I am? Lily shook her head. Sweetie Bogan. They keep telling me I'm all done. She trilled out the first few phrases of Misty. Does that sound to you like I'm all done? The voice was rusty, but Lily could hear what had been. The famous Sweetie. The old woman waved a claw, dismissing Lily. You have the voice. If you want what it can bring you, go after it. He leaned forward over the table, nearly upsetting the candle. Just don't sing Misty anymore. That song belongs to me. He reached up and pulled the black curtain closed. Lily walked back to Rasmussen, who watched her approach like a lion whose prey might escape. Lily was not surprised to see Sweetie totter down the long steel stairway of the Greenwood around 8 o'clock on the arm of the light-skinned man, whose name was Alfonso. The bar's owner, a 20-ish black man in a pink linen shirt and bow tie under his long apron, hurried to the bottom of the stairs. Sweetie grasped both his hands and bent up to kiss his cheek. He led Alfonso and Sweetie to a two-seater near the stage with a reserved sign on it. Shoot, Rasmussen said. I was hoping she'd stay away tonight, of all nights. His eyes were red when he took off the sunglasses to polish them. He smelled as if he'd been drinking all day. It'll be fine, Lily said. I'm flattered she's here. Don't worry so much. Rasmussen huffed and walked to the bar for another drink. Lily wondered if she should go say hello. But if Sweetie was angry, she might say something that would wound Lily's confidence. Lily pressed her shoulders back against the chair and sipped her ginger ale. The piano player was named Claudette Brown. Lily knew from the first notes the woman was as good a musician as had ever accompanied her. Halfway into a bouncy, sunny side of the street, Claudette helped raise her singing beyond her best. They finished on an up note. Claudette grinned from the piano stool, a golden sizer flashing in the spotlight. The audience exploded. Lily started to feel her way into Misty. At the break, she stepped down off the tiny stage and picked her way through the buzzing crowd. The bar's owner, mixing drinks, threw her a broad smile. The man sitting with Rasmussen rose as she walked up to the table. Darling, Rasmussen said, superb. Flushed with the joy of exceeding herself, she didn't need him to know that. The other man was 60-ish, fit-looking, straight silver hair tucked back behind his ears. He wore a purple striped shirt under a cream linen jacket. Ms. Harris, he said. Lily appreciated that he didn't assume he could use her first name. Mr. Dare? I'm so pleased to meet you, he said. Mr. Carter didn't exaggerate when he said you have a lovely voice. Thank you. And he must have told you Misty is one of my favorites. I heard Carmen sing it one night at Ratzo's, but you certainly owned it tonight. A chair scraped at the little table down front. Sweetie's voice cut through the crowd noise like glass. I'm telling you, her breath control is for shit. Lily looked over. Alfonso leaned his head in next to the old woman, trying to calm her or at least quiet her down. People at nearby tables tried to look away and listen at the same time. She's going to have to fuck her way up, Sweetie cawed. She has a very ordinary voice. Rasmussen stiffened. No, Lily said. I will take care of this. He rose and tucked his chair under the table. Excuse me a minute. Raz, it will be fine, he said. He threaded his way toward the front. Mr. Dare watched, unruffled. You do have the voice, he said. What do you mean? You have the singing voice to be a star. Like Sweetie? In her prime, but it takes so much more than that. Discipline, support, and guidance. The benefit of someone in the business. She glanced at Rasmussen. No, Dare said. If you want your talent to reach its potential, Mr. Carter is not the right choice. Lily felt as if she were standing on the end of a high diving board. And if I agree, I can help you with all that. Hard words from Sweetie made Rasmussen step back. His neck stiffened and he spit words back at her, low and guttural, curses. Alfonso stood up, a blade catching the yellow spotlight from the stage. He shoved it into Rasmussen's stomach. Someone screamed. Sweetie yelled. Dare was up and out of his chair in an instant, extending his hand. I think we'd better be somewhere else, he said. You don't want to be associated with this. Rasmussen folded and dropped to the floor. Sweetie leaned forward and spit on him. As Lily scrambled up the stairs behind Dare, the old woman yelled at her. You're free now, child. Go do it. Lily stood in the cold outside the bar on Mercy Street, wondering what Sweetie thought she was doing. She felt nothing for Rasmussen Carter and wondered if this was her first lesson in being a star. She threaded her arm through Dare's. I do want to see how far my voice will take me, she said, but let me be clear. Sweetie Bogan taught me no one owns a song, and I don't want you thinking you can own a singer. Of course not, Dare said. He shook his head as if she'd proposed something absurd. then lifted a long white hand to hail a cruising taxi. Thanks.
Excellent. I love it. Well, Dick, as you know, I've read all of your Elder Darrow books, and they're set in Boston, my hometown, so it's nice to be able to visit home when I read them. What led you to choose Boston as the setting for Elder Darrow's stories?
Well, my hometown too, Deirdre, and also I think it's such a fertile place for crime fiction. I mean, the people who've written crime fiction about Boston, the names are pretty well known. Robert Parker and Dennis Lehane. There are some other people, George V. Higgins. But I think the thing that intrigued me the most, and I saw a lot of this growing up in Boston too, was the general level of corruption in the politics and in the business around the city. There's a lot of potential in that for the kinds of stories I like to write. And also, there's a great history of racial and ethnic conflicts in the city, which also is pretty ripe for crime fiction.
For sure. Absolutely. And so what made you choose an amateur sleuth versus, say, a police detective or a private investigator as your main character?
Well, and I don't know if I should confess to this over the air, but I'm a great fan of I grew up reading the Travis McGee series, the John D. MacDonald series, which is heavily, Travis McGee obviously is like the original amateur sleuth. But from my perspective, I think an amateur sleuth gives me a little bit more scope, I think, in terms of the things that the sleuth can do, the places he can go. A lot of times with a police procedural, the progression of the story is kind of set for you by the fact of the investigation. Whereas with an amateur, I think you can go off in some interesting directions, or at least you have the potential for doing that kind of thing. And it's also, I think, for me as a reader, I can feel a little more empathetic. I mean, to me, it's like watching baseball as opposed to football, because I could believe myself as a baseball player because they all look relatively normal. I can't believe myself as a professional football player, and so I think it gives a little more sense of maybe the reader can pull a little more empathy in when they're reading along with an amateur.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. As I said, I love Elder Darrow. I've read all of the books so far, and so we'll definitely talk more about how people can find these books at the end of the show. And I see that a few people have written in some questions, so we'll have some more questions for you at the end, Dick. So if you want to hang out. Next, we're going to go on to Phyllis Gobbell in Tennessee. Welcome, Phyllis. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank everybody who's joined tonight. Thanks. Glad to be with you. It's a wonderful way to connect on a rainy night like it is here in Nashville when we can't go out to the bookstore for a reading. And I'm just grateful that I can reach out to you like this to tell you a little bit about my book. It's Treachery in Tuscany, and Treachery in Tuscany is the third and the most recent in the Jordan Mayfair mystery series. Jordan Mayfair is an architect from Savannah, Georgia, and she also is an amateur sleuth. In the series, she has traveled to the south of France and solved crimes there. And she's traveled to Ireland, and now she is in Italy, particularly in Florence and the Tuscan Hills, where a villa has a prominent role in the story. I'm going to read a few short passages for you and try to connect the story a little bit, but I couldn't read about Italy tonight without thinking about the lovely people there who have suffered so much recently. And so my heart goes out to them as Jordan Mayfair, as I'm reading about Jordan Mayfair arriving in Florence. And this is the way I like to remember it. Chapter 1. Sunday morning, my first glimpse of Florence since I was 21. Sunday morning in the spacious piazza, quiet except for the chime of church bells from an ancient bell tower. My jet-lagged brain tried to take in everything all at once. No sign to identify the Convento di Santa Francesca Forense, but the GPS on our rental car had directed us to the imposing 15th century convent. A white Alfa Romeo with a blue stripe and the words Polizia Municipale along the side pulled away from the curb as we took our luggage from the trunk of our Fiat. A waif-like teenager standing some distance away waited until the police car had departed before she came closer to us. Convento? I said. She said something in Italian to which I could only reply, non capisco. Si, it is a convent, she said. So my Italian left something to be desired. The girl gave the stark terracotta facade a measuring gaze, then darted us an uncertain smile, hitched up her rucksack on her thin shoulder, and headed through the arched entrance. At the double wooden doors, she pushed a buzzer, and a loud click announced the door was unlocked. We filed in behind her, pulling our luggage on wheels. Exactly as I imagined, Alex declared. I was traveling with Alex, my uncle, as I had done twice before. Travel writer Alexander Carlyle was in Florence to research his third book, and I was here to keep an eye on him. Well, Jordan insists that she watches out for Alex, but really he has to watch out for her because trouble is always finding her wherever she goes. They have to wait for their rooms to be ready, and so does the girl that they have met. And so they go out into the courtyard. Leaving the building through French doors, I had to catch my breath. The gardens were impeccably landscaped with cobblestones marking a path through the grass, flowering bushes, gently bending trees, and hedges that formed a maze. Soft breeze, floral fragrance. The focal point was a large fountain with water flowing from the mouth of a lamb, its sweet face upturned. Curled up on her side on one of the stone benches, her head resting on her rucksack, was the girl we had met. Her name yet unknown to us. Her dark curly hair was tangled. Low-slung jeans and crop top revealed a belly button with a ring that matched the ring in one eyebrow. Her blue rucksack was too clean, too new-looking for someone who had spent time on the streets, and she did apparently have a reservation. In sleep, her face could have passed for a young child's. A butterfly swarmed around her and settled on her knee, where a hole in her jeans showed her skin. And that was how I would think of Sophia Costa, Sophie, even when nightmares blurred my memories. On in the book, there's another character who has been in all three books, Paul Broussard, a charming patron of the arts, and he has come to Florence to spend time with Jordan. It has not been easy for them. Murder seems to get in the way of romance in all the books. In this scene, they are waiting for a festival. There is a festival in Florence, and they're waiting for the parade to come into the piazza. Paul has a table across the piazza from the convent. And I'll take it up where it says, in another 5 minutes, the parade entered the piazza. Everyone at the outdoor tables stood up. Musicians led the parade, and drummers continued to show up, keeping the beat. The piazza was soon filled with marchers moving through, all ages. Men carried children on their shoulders. Standing, we had a good view, in spite of the crowd that had gathered between us and the square. We had an excellent view of the colorful papier-mâché lanterns swaying at the tops of high poles. Onlookers clapped and cheered. So did we, as did all the other patrons of the cafe. Directly across the square from us was the convent. While my gaze was drawn to the upper level convent window, il secondo plano, which was the third floor, I will never know. Movement in the window caught my eye, and something fell to the ground. Screams and cries rose above the sounds of the parade. Pandemonium broke out in front of the convent and rippled through the crowd like rushing waters. I must have screamed too. I was vaguely aware of Paul and Alex calling my name. A woman, apparently an American, at the next table was crying out, "Did you see? Somebody fell out of the window over there." She was pointing at what I had seen. My throat closed up. I could scarcely breathe. I didn't know if I could speak at all, but I knew I couldn't say what I was thinking. Sophie's window. Well, it is indeed Sophie's window. It is Sophie. Her door is locked, and so the polizia are going to say it's a suicide. But Jordan, with her architect's eye, is going to set out to prove that it is a murder and to find justice for Sophie. Thank you for listening, and back to you, Deirdre.
Excellent. Well, let me ask you a few questions. I've also read all of these, all of your Jordan Mayfair mysteries, and I know you travel to France, to Ireland, to Italy for these 3 books. What kind of information are you looking for when you do this research?
Well, the first 2, I had already been to Provence and to Ireland when I wrote the books. But this one, I had not. I went to Florence particularly to be inspired for the 3rd Jordan Mayfair mystery. And I just took all kinds of notes. Every time I bought something, I wrote down how much it cost, receipts, brochures. I just watched for everything. I brought back everything that I could. And I looked for things that I thought I might use in the book, and there were plenty. For example, there were a lot of motorbikes in the streets, and the streets are small. And when you're walking, you feel like it's just inches from you. And I thought, I'm surprised somebody's not killed every day by motorbike. I'll have to use that. And I do use that in the book. And my window in the convent, I stayed in a convent, and my window was very large. There was no screen on it. And I thought, I don't see how people keep from falling out. And so I said, yeah, I'll use that in the book, and I did. So those are the kinds of things that I look for.
Excellent. I know you teach creative writing at a college. What kind of advice do you most frequently give to young writers these days?
Well, I like to tell them to write what you are excited about, write what you're good at. And I think that's good advice for anybody. We tend to look at the bestseller list and we think, well, I'd like to write that. I need to write that. But I like for people to write what they're good at. and find their strengths. And I try to help my creative writing students find their strengths. I tell them to read, because I think you learn so much from reading, especially the kinds of books that you want to write. If you want to write mysteries, read mysteries. And then I also say, work on your craft. It's so tempting to say, I have an idea and I want to get published. Well, all of us know that is a long journey. And so I tell my students, concentrate on working on your craft. I still go to workshops and conferences, and I love to work on my craft, and that's the advice I give them.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Phyllis.
Okay.
We will definitely get back to you at the end of the show with more questions. And next, we're going to go on to Erica Obi in New York. Welcome, Erica.
I am unmuted. How are you?
Very good. Excellent to see you.
You too. And thank you guys so much for doing this. And thank you for the beautiful cover and the beautiful background. This is all Deirdre's work. Don't blame me. Okay, so should I just start yammering? Okay. Well, I'm Erica Obi. I am the author of that right back there, Horseman's Word. This is a historical novel set in the aftermath of the Civil War. It's set largely in Saratoga Springs, although the prologue I'm going to read is actually in New York City. And I think the essential problem that faces our heroine is whether we have an amateur sleuth here or we have a professional spy. That's actually the central problem that promotes itself right here in the prologue, which is in Gramercy Park. And even beyond that, whether this person is this enchanting Irish horse whisperer she has fallen in love with, or perhaps his half-brother who has stolen his identity and is a English/Confederate spy. So here we go from the prologue to The Horseman's Word. Gramercy Park, New York City, May 1863. Lee had just won a decisive victory at Chancellorsville, and reports swirled that the Confederate army that was marching up the Shenandoah Valley would succeed in invading the North this time. Anxious families along the Susquehanna had already begun to bury the family silver and board their windows. Those that could abandoned their homes and fled with what valuables they could carry. The fear, however, had not yet stretched as far as New York City. At least it had yet to reach the sheltered enclave known as Gramercy Park. The tall windows of the lofty townhouses had been flung open rather than boarded up, and the silver sparkled along with the guests. The lamps were lit, the champagne flowed, and the music from a string quartet wafted across the cobblestone street into the quiet of the gated park. For tonight, the well-known philanthropist Jonathan Adair was to sign the final papers that deeded his magnificent collection to the city of New York, and he was celebrating this singular contribution to the betterment of mankind by unveiling the contents of his priceless new acquisition. An ancient cast beaten out of ancient bronze and chased with curious figures of horses that some said was Gaulish and some said Phoenician. Some even said it had survived the cataclysmic fall of Troy itself. But such tales meant nothing to the desperate Fenian that Rose Adair confronted at gunpoint in the shadows of the gated park across the cobbled street. A true-born son of the Gael, Declan Sullivan had confided his own burning dreams on that fatal trip to Jones's Wood when she had fallen in love with him. Spun yarns of a mysterious society of horsemen with powers bestowed upon them by none other than Epona, the horse goddess herself, as they had swung together in a gondola suspended from a massive wooden scaffold. and whispered the powers of the priceless artifact he had risked his soul to steal from the goddess's sacred spring and now sought to sell. You're about to see my cat, I'm afraid. That's Bittman. Had stolen from the goddess's sacred spring and now sought to sell, while they giggled at the finish line of a wheelbarrow race and a daredevil walked a tightrope high above their heads. All of these stories, that's Bittman, just say hello. She's very friendly. Hi, Bittman. All right, you go. Sorry. All of these stories no more than words, as much of a cheat and illusion as the tales he had spun of Tir na Nog, the legendary Irish land beyond the Western Sea, or his love for her. For like the fair folk that populated those fabled lands, the man who faced her now might never lie, but he was incapable of telling the truth. Roisin, he said, my sweet Roisin Douve, my darling Rosaline. Please do not call me that, for I have told you my name, my true name, often enough. She swallowed hard, trying to prevent her voice from shaking as badly as the pistol she held in both hands. But I cannot say the same of you, Captain Fallon. Captain Tamerlane Fallon, I believe it is. A moment's silence during which even the music wafting from the open window seemed to still. Then his jaw set. Ah, he said. Indeed, she agreed. All right.
Excellent. I have also read this book. I've read all the books tonight, and I loved so much of it. I actually have an action figure, Deirdre, Mystic Knight of Tir na Nog, so I could totally relate to the Irish part of it. But I want to ask you a question. I found it so interesting. I've read a lot of historical novels. What are the perils of setting a historical novel, not just in a specific place and year, but in the case of The Horseman's Word, a specific 2-week period?
Never again. This was set, it's a fascinating time period because Saratoga Springs is just taking off, and this fascinating Irishman named Morrissey has convinced people like the Vanderbilts to support him. And this is all right in the aftermath of the end of the war, a very traumatic time. And what happens is everybody goes up there and they say, let bygones be bygones. They just want to go ahead. So it's a fascinating moment. On the other hand, yes, I knew when the racing season sort of ended. The racing season began. I knew when the war ended. We've got a very short window here, and there were fires in Saratoga Springs. Not to mention, like in this prologue, I had wanted somebody to some anarchists to blow things up with dynamite. And at the last moment I went, well, I'd better just check that little one out. And it was like 2 years too early. So yeah, I'd never be that specific again. But again, if you're a research junkie like me, you sort of live for this. It goes both ways.
That's amazing. Well, and you have said that one of the great joys of researching is finding the things that come counter to your expectations. What did you discover when you were researching Horseman's Word?
I think the most interesting thing was, I'm like one of these little Celtic French girls, and my whole 19th century view is basically gangs in New York, Ireland, Irish Americans. So I'm coming into it with that mindset. And actually my wheelhouse of research is a little later, about 1890 to 1920. And I started looking at all this, and the first thing I found was the draft riots in New York, which were horrific. They're just horrific. They were people behaving badly. This is not Irish America's finest moment. Of course, everybody, poor people, being conscripted to an army for a war you didn't sign up for. Yes, the Irish Americans basically lynched Black Americans. It was horrible. And my first reaction was like, yeesh, I don't want to write about that. And then my second reaction was, you have to write about this. You've got to try to make sense of this. So that was like the impetus. And then what became interesting was when I looked in Saratoga Springs, again, I'm all like Daniel Day-Lewis and Gangs of New York and all that. But when you go up to Saratoga Springs, they are a profoundly middle-class, respectable, the Irish up there, they built their Catholic church at gunpoint, you know? So actually this was very surprising to me was I wanted all these sort of loose gang members like John Morrissey, who was. But in fact, what you've got among the sort of good Irish people in Saratoga Springs are these people who are really building that sort of Irish dream in the new land up there. And that was just fascinating and unexpected.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, again, we'll be providing more links at the end of the show to Erica's books. Next, we're going to go on to C.B. Shanahan in New Hampshire. Welcome, C.B.
Thanks, Deirdre. I just wanted to say it's such a privilege to be here. It's my first reading ever. And I wanted to thank Encircle and Eddie and Deirdre and for giving me this chance. And it's just been such an honor to hear everybody reading their stuff. C.B. Shanahan has written, that's me, Hollis Whitaker, which is an adventure story. It revolves around a 10-year-old boy, his new friend, and a Native American woman who is the reluctant hero leading them across the country. The story so far, I'm going to read a bit of a chapter. The story so far, Hollis has found a medallion in the bed of a stream, and a few weeks later, he begins to show signs of genius in math and science. Now, he doesn't know that it was stolen from the military in 1945 and that it helped to change the outcome of World War II, nor does anyone have any reason to suspect that the medallion is why he's suddenly so smart. But his friend Kirby, his new friend Kirby, has convinced him to have the medallion appraised to see if it's worth anything. So they brought it to an antique store. The antique store owner had no idea what it was, and she posted the item on an online message board to see what the other experts might have thought. So anyways, the boys have returned to the shop the following day, and that's where I'll pick it up. This is Hollis Whitaker. "Oh, I know this dude," said Kirby. "This is Elvis. I don't care what anyone says. Elvis was the man." "What, the music?" asked Hollis. He'd grown accustomed to Kirby's apparent depthless pool of musical knowledge. It was impossible to stump the kid. Where Hollis was the school's undisputed king of science and math, Kirby was a music trivia master. Teachers and parents stood in awe of the first grader. Yes, he was like a rock and roll god. Hollis thumbed through a stash of classic comic books in the front shelves. "He seems okay." "Okay, check it out, Jerkosaurus. He ushered in modern music. He had the hips, man." Kirby spun a 2-foot globe on its axis, stopping it with a finger. "Pacific Ocean," he said. Hollis didn't reply. Kirby spun it again, once again stopping its motion with his index finger. "Chad. Hey, check it out. This country's called Chad." "No duh," said Hollis. "What, you know it?" "I've heard of it." "Yeah, well, it's a stupid name." Hollis delved into an early copy of the Fantastic Four as Kirby moved on from the globe to a 1940s-era replica tank. "Cool," he said, picking it up. "Man, toys used to be really heavy. What is this, made out of a real tank?" Hollis glanced over at Kirby and held it up for him to view. Then Hollis surveyed the cash register area. "Where's Fern, do you think?" Kirby shot an eye over to the display cases. "I don't know, out back?" Hollis returned the comic book to the milk crate, where he picked it up and edged closer to the back of the store, examining trinkets along the way. "Get a load of this," said Kirby, "a space bus." He held it up in an old tin bus with robots and astronauts painted in the windows as passengers. Hollis nodded to his friend and rested his arms on the display case in front of the cash register. "Mrs. Maury," he hollered. Kirby joined him. Hollis shouted toward the doors, "Fern?" There was no response. "You think we should come back?" Hollis asked Kirby. "No, she's here. Maybe there's a basement or something. She wouldn't leave the door open if she left." Kirby slipped by Hollis behind the counter. "Mrs. Maury," he said, stepping toward the office door. As he entered the back room, Kirby froze. "We're not supposed to go back there without her," Hollis said, moving in behind his friend. He peeked around the corner to see what Kirby was staring at, laying a hand on his friend's arm. As he peered over Kirby's shoulder, he noticed Mrs. Morey lying on her back on the far edge of the room, an accumulation of dark liquid pooled underneath the upper half of her body. Her legs, clad in tan slacks, were bent unnaturally, her ruffled sweater soaking up the congealed puddle. There was nothing in her eyes, no spark, no life. They were wide and fixed on the wall. In the center of the mangled forehead, a bullet hole. Jesus, Kirby mumbled, knocking Hollis off balance as he bolted past him into the shop front. Hollis staggered back to the display case, bumping into Kirby, the color fading from his face. Ah, Jesus, said Kirby. Ah, crap. She's dead, Hollis. Someone shot her. Hollis didn't reply. He was focused on the open door to the back office. They had just talked to Mrs. Morey. They were hearing her yesterday. Now there was blood all over the floor and she was shot. That was definitely a bullet hole in her forehead. She didn't look real, like someone had vandalized a pale and waxy mannequin. He began to wonder if he was smelling blood. Would the metallic odor carry this far away from the body? The stereo's tinny speakers cut through an unnatural silence in the store. The bouncy keyboard and Elvis Presley's Bossa Nova Baby, a macabre contrast to the bloody scene on the other side of the office door. The boys remained frozen. 30 seconds, 5 minutes, they couldn't tell. Time had ceased to move at its normal pace. We need to call the police, Hollis said, unable to avert his gaze from the door. Are you mental? Kirby replied. They're going to say we did it. We got to get out of here. Kirby started for the front door, but hesitated when Hollis wouldn't budge. Come on, man, let's go. Hollis turned toward his friend, his face pale and sunken. We can't. We need to call the cops. Didn't you hear me? They'll pin it on us. That's how this always goes down. We don't have a gun, Hollis replied. Do your parents have a gun? No. Well, neither do mine. They're not going to say 2 kids without a gun shot her. Kids always find bodies. This was like a robbery or something. Kirby eased up a bit and stepped back toward Hollis. Okay, then you call him. Hollis scanned the counter behind the display case. Fern's cell phone was next to the cash register. He edged along the case, staying as far from the door as he could. He lifted the phone. It's locked, he said. No, wait, there's an emergency thing. He clicked the screen and struggled to slow his breath. Yeah? Someone shot a lady here, he said. Kirby's attention bounced between the office door and Hollis. No, I think she's dead. Yeah. We were at the antique store. Kirby took a step toward the office and peeked around the corner at Fern's body. She wants to know, Hollis said to Kirby, who drew his attention back to the matter at hand. She wants to know what the antique store's called. What's the name? Kirby looked stumped, raising his palms to the ceiling. Well, go look. Hollis pointed at the front door, and Kirby darted outside, returning a couple seconds later. Relics and More, said Kirby. It's Relics and More, Hollis explained. Yeah, okay. I don't know. This isn't my phone. I think it belongs to the lady. Okay. Hollis hung up the phone. She said there's a unit on the way. Oh man, Hollis, what if this had something to do with us? Why would it have anything to do with us? It was a robbery. I told you. Think about it. We were in here yesterday asking about your necklace, and today she's dead. So what does that mean? Maybe it's worth something. Kirby peeked into the office again, holding steady on the periphery and tapping his fingers on the door jamb before tiptoeing inside. What are you doing? Hollis shouted. He slinked to the doorway and looked in at his friend, who was making his way deeper into the room. Get out of there! What are you doing? Kirby stepped through Fern's twisted legs, avoiding the pool of blood underneath her upper body, and climbed onto the chair in the front of the computer. Kirby! Kirby, cut it out! Get out of there! I'm just looking, man. I'm just making sure. Kirby woke the computer and opened the browser, clicking on the bookmark Fern had used the day before. Within a few seconds, the message board on which she had posted a query appeared. This is it, antiques. He scanned the page, scrolling down every few seconds. Kirby, this is serious, said Hollis. This isn't like detention. This is like police and jail. It's not here, Kirby said. What? It's not here, I'm telling you. What do you mean? I mean the post she put on here yesterday about your necklace. It's not here anymore. What, like it was deleted? That's what I said. Hollis inched closer, sticking close to the wall, taking a short, awkward hop to avoid the puddle. He stepped over Fern's gray, motionless arm, her sweater having acted like a sponge with the clotting blood. On the far side of Fern's body, Hollis leaned in towards Kirby and studied the web page. Kirby scrolled up. See the dates? That was last week. They're in order. Look. He scrolled up some more. See, here's yesterday. There's only 2, and neither one is ours. And see, here's today. Someone posted one this morning. Ours is missing. That's the end of the chapter. There you are.
Excellent. I absolutely love this book. I've loved everything about it, but I gotta ask you, where did the concept for Hollis Whitaker come from?
Oh, it started with just the first chapter. The first chapter, I don't want to give too much away, starts in 1945, and I was cleaning up a yard one time, and I had this in my head. You know, I always have thoughts going through my head, story ideas, and I thought about some sort of magical item that I found, and I didn't know what it would be. It was some sort of magical item, but it just popped into my head that somebody had thrown it away in the 40s, and it had been sitting there for 80 years. And I wrote the first chapter with that in mind, and I didn't really know what the rest of the book was going to be at that point. I thought that the protagonist was going to be someone like me, an adult male, and it dawned on me after the first chapter that it wasn't really scary. I figured, you know, the government's going to want this back, and it's not going to be as scary if it's somebody like me, because I can get away from them. But who can't? A kid can't. Kid's going to be more scary. So at that point, and I was also watching Stranger Things on TV, which I thought I loved that show. And with the kids was so funny in it. And I said, you know, kids is the way to go with this. And so that's how I settled on having a couple kids. And the rest of the story, it just came up as I was writing. I know there's 2 different philosophies on writing. And one of them is to plan the whole thing out before you do it. And I didn't really do that. I just started off with the first chapter, and I did a few chapters after that. And it wasn't even until the end of the book that I knew what the ending was going to be, or even what the amulet really was. It was just sort of, I was waiting to find it myself, and I think I was happy at the end of it, though.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, and as you said, because there's kids in it, sure, there's a little violence, maybe even a little language, but for the most part, your book is readable from age 12 up. I mean, I loved it. I read it twice.
I tried to make it like I grew up. My formative years was probably during the 80s, and I love the movies from the 80s and the books, the feeling that you got from some of the adventure movies, and that's what I was trying to recapture with this.
Excellent. Yeah, it gave me the feeling of like Stand By Me and Stranger Things, and even and Super 8 is another movie that I love that, you know, involves kids and
that's exactly what I was going
and
for,
such.
yeah.
So, yeah, excellent. So what made you decide on 2 timelines in the book?
Well, after I had written the first chapter, and there's a woman in 1945, and she steals this amulet from the military, and she ends up throwing it out in the woods somewhere. We don't know where it is until Hollis finds it today. And she doesn't end up all that good after the first chapter. In the first chapter, let's just say she's not in good shape. And I thought I gave her short shrift. And I said, and a few chapters in, I said, you know, I think she could really be something. But I need to, so I decided what I ended up doing was I went through every few chapters, I went through her part of the day leading up to what caused her to steal the amulet from the military and how she did it. And it worked in, I think, so perfectly. And it wasn't, you know, there's some surprises at the end, which I guess I can't give away, but
no.
She plays a bigger role than you would initially think in the first chapter. So we'll say that.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, I think everybody has you know done such a great job tonight giving us information about their books. We do have some questions from the audience. They've chimed in from the get-go. I'm going to save the first question for the end, but let's start with you, Dick. We have a question. When did you first start writing mystery novels, and is it your only genre?
I have to confess, I started out writing poetry, and then I gave that up when I saw how bad I was at it. And I wrote a lot of literary short stories, but they kept getting longer and longer and longer. And I also realized I've been reading crime fiction, you know, since Rod Serling and Alfred Hitchcock, and you know, since I was a little kid. And I'm like, well, why couldn't I do that? You know, I mean, why do I have to write about this other stuff? So it was sort of a progression from poetry to literary short stories. I never did really try to do a literary novel because I think I probably would have gagged on it. But that's kind of how I got to the crime fiction stuff. And I'm very happy with it. I mean, it gives me space to do some commentary, some social commentary. It gives me space to indulge my shoot 'em up tendencies. And it just gives me a lot of room.
Yeah, excellent. I love it. Phyllis, why don't we go to you for a minute? We have a question. Where will your next book be set? Where will Jordan Mayfair go next?
Well, I have to travel somewhere, and so right now I'm at home, and so it probably will be a while, but there will be another one. I have toyed with the idea of letting Jordan stay at her home in Savannah for a while. Savannah, Georgia is just a wonderful place, and so I've thought about that. Right now, I don't know. I don't know. I have to travel somewhere and before I really come up with the next one. I'm working on
as you said, Savannah is so rich.
Well, yes. I am working on a standalone mystery right now in the interim while I'm deciding where she's going to go next.
Excellent. Very interesting. Erica, let me ask you a question. Actually, I love this one. Why do you clearly have a crush on John Morrissey, the man who founded Saratoga?
Dear God, I do have a crush on him. Because he's the original he's the Irish dream and the original self-made man. He was a punk. He ran with the Dead Rabbits, which is a gang. And he fell in love with this woman from Miss Porter's, believe it or not. And he was in jail, and he just was determined to make himself good enough for her. And he did. And he taught himself to read in jail. Then he goes out, and he never loses that whole criminal aspect, which is great because he's going up. I mean, he turned Vanderbilt, Astor, and Jerome, who are, I mean, those are the rich, well-mannered criminals as opposed to the street fighter criminal. But he turned them and he made them support Saratoga Springs. He wound up being a representative, House of Representatives, US representative, and he just battled his way up, and he takes on the well-mannered criminals, and he wins, and you've got to love it. You've got to love him. One of the famous stories was he was known as a bare knuckles boxer, and he was known as Old Smoky because apparently he was doing this bare knuckles fight. He got shoved against a live stove. His back was burning. He staggers up and he just punches this guy and wins the fight. So I sort of love that, you know, the aspirational part of it, the fact he wins, and the fact that he's also got that, yeah, that whole Daniel Day-Lewis thing going on. You know, we all love Daniel.
Excellent. CB, we have a question for you here. Is there a specific area of New Hampshire you drew on for Hollis Whitaker?
Well, I was raised in around the Dover area. I was born in Ireland, but I moved to Dover when I was about 4. So Dover, there's a lot of where the boys are running around. It's supposed to be Virginia, but I based it on Dover because I find that if you base it on a real place, you don't really have to think about it that much. So Dover would be the New Hampshire area, but the book itself, it takes place in Virginia.
True. I'm seeing that we have a few readers chiming in that they love Savannah, Phyllis, but Nashville is also mentioned as a rich area that would obviously be a great place for Jordan Mayfair to go next as well. So
I'll think about that. I'll take it under consideration.
Excellent. And what is the standalone that you're writing, Phyllis?
It's a maybe a bigger book than a mystery, about a small town family in Tennessee, and a young man was involved in a convenience store robbery 10 years ago, and he's disappeared, and he comes home, and he's trying to find his way back in every way. Well, then there's a death in the family, and a lot of family dynamics. It's kind of a literary novel, but that's sometimes the kiss of death if you say it's a literary novel.
Oh, I don't think so.
I do think it is a little bit of a bigger idea than just the mysteries where you're trying to solve crimes and all. So I'm still working on it. It's a lot about family, forgiveness, redemption, all of those themes. And
all themes we can relate to. Excellent.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Dick, I see another question for you. I enjoyed Dick Cass's inclusion of singers in the excerpt. What was the inspiration behind that choice?
Well, actually, only one of the 4 existing books doesn't have singers in it. It really started out the whole background of Elder Darrow has this dive bar that he's been trying to turn into a decent jazz spot through the entire series, and he's started out as a pretty rasty bar in the South End of Boston, and so there actually have been, I think there has been, Deirdre, you might have to catch me on this, but I think there's been a major female singer character in every book.
I think that's true. I have appreciated
except
that.
maybe the third one, except maybe Burton Solo, which is mostly about Burton. But yeah, I'm a huge jazz fan, specifically of singers, and then even more specifically of female singers, both historical and current. And so they also give me a little bit more in terms of characters than, say, trying to bring a band in and try and deal with all the members of the band or something like that.
Excellent. We have can you talk a little more, Erica, about the draft riots in New York and why they're so central to your novel?
Yes. Yeah. They're terrible. I mean, you've got, and I'm not even going to go into hard times that we're all facing right now, but this is, it's the same sort of thing. You've got a bunch of Irish people who are literally starving over there in Ireland. They have often sold everything, made every sacrifice possible to come to America. And I'm sorry, I'm not even that much of a fan of gangs in New York, but there's the famous scene in there where they go, "Welcome to America, go fight for your country." So they are now being sent, the Irish people are now being sent down to fight in the Union Army for a war they never signed up for. And there's also a fear of jobs. I mean, it all keeps coming back, doesn't it? There is a fear of jobs that the Black people, former slaves coming up from the South will take away these jobs. And then what happens is at a certain point, they're going to institute a draft for the Union Army. It's been volunteer before that. And rich people can buy their way out. So you do have, and this is why I said in Gramercy Park, there is a very incredible anger. If you got $500, you can buy your son out of the army. The Irishman doesn't have that, neither does a former slave. So they riot, and the butchery was horrible. I think it's 287 children died in the sort of Negro asylum, as it was called. I mean, there's no excusing this, but this is always when you've got have-nots fighting for something. And again, with Gramercy Park, and we do this, the novel touches on it tangentially, the militia goes to Gramercy Park to defend those houses while they don't go up to Harlem. New York City history for anyone who cares. Harlem was a thriving Black community up until about 1860. And then Black people fled to Brooklyn in terror, because Brooklyn was a different city. They fled in terror after that. And they really didn't come back until the 1920s. So yeah, it is one of these horrible things where you try to make sense of why people are doing brutal things. Good people are doing brutal things out of fear, I guess.
Very interesting. Now there's sort of a follow-up to a question, or similarly, says, do you know something about the history of a place before you decide to set a novel there, and then let the historical surprises come?
That's interesting, because yes, I do tend to set my novels in the Hudson Valley writ large, which would include Saratoga Springs. And actually I did a signing up in Saratoga Springs and I said, well, it's not really the Hudson Valley. And someone said, oh yes, it is. But you know, the Hudson Valley, for those of us who are mystic minded, the curtain is very, very thin here. And you've got these, I'm a big house person, but landscape, where you've got these houses and you look at them and you know, this is a taste of what it might have been like to be here in 1880. I live in an arts colony in Woodstock. But the boundaries are very, very soft up here from past and present. And so I guess I'm always feeling that. But then what's really interesting is to go out, I'm one of those boring PhD people, going out there and do the real research and find out what you really know as opposed to what you get when you're drifting among the Catskills kind of thing.
Excellent. CB, we have another question for you. Is there some of you in the characters in your book?
Oh, most definitely. The main character, Hollis, I mean, I was going to have somebody like myself be the protagonist, but I had to put myself into a 10-year-old, and I have heart problems, and so does Hollis. And I think I had a hard time making friends when I was younger, and so does Hollis. And yeah, and he's pretty unsure of himself. And I think we all had, maybe not everybody. I certainly had that when I was growing up. You know, you don't have any assuredness in yourself. So Hollis definitely, he's probably I'm probably most like him more than anybody else in there. Everybody else is a little too sure of themselves, I guess I would say.
Interesting. Well, again, thank you all for joining us tonight. We've answered everyone's questions. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you read your books, and I have actually already read them. So again, thank you for joining us. To everybody out there listening, thank you for coming in. And oh, we have one more question coming in. Oh, well, this is just a comment that someone really enjoyed it. So that's wonderful. We want to thank you everyone again for attending the Author Reading Showcase. more comments. We will be doing this again, ideally, so please stay tuned for more details and more author readings. To learn more about these authors and their books, please visit encirclepub.com. And you can also find Encircle Publications on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. From all of us at Encircle Publications, we are sending you our best wishes. Until next time, please be safe and well. Take care. Good night.